There are new reports the House January 6th committee is preparing to recommend criminal charges against former President Donald Trump. The select panel is meeting publicly for the last time Monday. According to the report, a subcommittee that evaluated criminal referrals is expected to recommend federal charges of insurrection, obstruction of an official proceeding, and conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government. The committee's full report will then be published on Wednesday. Former federal prosecutor Joe Moreno is here with us in the D.C. studio. Joe, if the January 6th committee goes forward with this recommendation for former President Trump, what, as a threshold matter, constitutes the crime of insurrection?
Sure. So in its simplest form, Catherine, it's the use of words to incite violence against the government of the United States. Thankfully, it's a crime that is rarely invoked because it's a rare thing. And we respect our First Amendment rights so much in this country. And so it really goes to the question of where does your First Amendment right to speak out, even in anger, even against the policies of the government, veer into the support of violence. And that is where this will so hinge on is did the words, did the actions of Donald Trump lead to the violence on Capitol Hill that day?
So just to take it a step further, how important is getting inside the mind of the former president and this issue of intent?
Well, I mean, it'll be very important with respect from the defendant, right? He's going to make a big deal about the fact that I didn't intend for anyone to act on my words or on my tweets. I didn't mean for violence. I was basically just kind of expressing myself. That will be belied by the fact that you had thousands of people that very seemingly did act on the president's words and in fact did engage in violence in the hours that followed his tweets and his statements. So
and some of them even said they came to the Capitol because it was at the direction of the former president.
At the direction, at the encouragement, with the support of the president, absolutely. Hundreds of people have tried to use that as part of their argument.
Okay, so let's kind of cut to the chase. These referrals are not binding, but are they more than symbolic?
Well, it's interesting. It puts the Department of Justice in an interesting position.
Does it put them in a box?
Well, see, because normally when you build a case against any defendant, much less a complex federal prosecution, it's done in secret, right? It has to be. Now we know so much about what Congress has found over the past 18 months or so by the committee, and they're now going to hand it to the Justice Department. The DOJ is going to be under a lot of pressure, right? Because on the one hand, they don't want to look like they're being politicized, right? They want to look like they're making a non-political,
independent
decision, right. Absolutely. But at the same time, you can't just ignore the fact that the public knows this extremely damaging information about Donald Trump. So it's not binding, but it certainly puts them in a tough spot.
Okay, so let's close out with some video. I wanted you to take a look at this video. I think many of us remember it from January 6th. This is video where Douglas Jensen, he's a follower of the conspiracy theory QAnon, was following Officer Goodman up towards the Senate chamber, and Officer Goodman veered the mob away from that chamber. Is that the moment there where Jensen got his conviction for 5 years in prison?
Yeah, I mean, very likely. That's right. I mean, and this is what's going to really not sit well with people, because you're going to have someone like Jensen who's rightfully held responsible for the directly violent acts that he engaged in, along with hundreds of other people that day. But the person at the top, the person whose tweets, whose words people often relied on, how can we not hold him responsible? And so a lot of people are, they'll say, look, I think most Americans will defer to the Department of Justice in making the wise decision whichever way they go. But it's not going to sit too well when they see someone like this who's rightfully held to his actions. But then what about the person who was kind of sitting at the top, who at worst directed it, at best was extremely reckless, and then sat in his hands and didn't stop it?
Joe Moreno, thank you.